Hello Year 9. I hope you found the last lesson interesting about the existence of God. Today it's still about the existence of God, but we're going to focus in on one particular or two particular areas about that. The first one is the design argument, which basically says that the world must have been designed to be as awesome as it is, and that's why some people believe that it was made by a god or some sort of higher power. And then also later on, you're going to learn about the problem of evil, which sort of says the opposite, that the world is a bit rubbish, and because it is so rubbish, there's no way it could be made by an awesome, powerful creator. So whichever side of that argument you agree with, just try to keep an open mind, learn about the different arguments and the different philosophical points for and against, and hopefully by the end you'll have lots more discussion points in your mind and loads more wisdom about this topic to amaze your friends and family with. So firstly, to kick off, the key question, firstly, what you need to do, if you haven't already done it, is click on the link at the bottom of the Go for Schools homework, and that will open up a folder that has a PowerPoint on it. It's on my computer already, and also a couple of other documents. There's a song on there. Don't play that yet. We're going to play that later. And there's also, no, that's it. Just a couple of documents. All you need for this lesson is a pen and a bit of paper. So not too complicated. Also, a computer is helpful. Otherwise you wouldn't be watching this, or a phone or something. I'll also be teaching you later on in the video how to log into your online textbook that you all have. And I'll show you which textbook it is. Wait there, got it here. It's actually both of these, but this is the main one that we're going to be looking at today. So I'll teach you how to log into your online version of this. And then this is the other one. And by the end of GCSE, hopefully you'll know loads of the stuff that's in these books so that you can do well in your religious studies GCSE. So to start off, I'm going to explain really briefly and probably quite badly the arguments for and against the design argument, and then you're going to do some work to actually jot down these arguments on one big piece of paper. So the bigger the bit of paper you can find, the better. A3 would probably be best, but if not, just any A4 bit of paper. If you turn it on its side, you're going to be dividing it in two and jotting down some arguments for the existence of God related to design. And then later on in the lesson, when we learn about the problem of evil and some of the other objections, you can jot down some of the arguments against, and essentially just make your mind up what at this point in your life you think about whether the world was designed or not. And it's quite an interesting thing to think about, really, even if you're not usually that interested in religion and stuff like that. It's quite interesting. So to start off, we'll just kick off with a couple of key words. I'll just pause this and show you more closely. Here they are. So these are some terms that might come up throughout the lesson. Purpose is the first one. This is quite a major word in terms of the design argument, because generally everything that is made has some kind of purpose, some sort of reason for being. Really interestingly, the purpose for something, if you think about it, usually exists before the actual object itself, which is incredible, really. So if you think about any object, usually the reason for it being here exists and is real, and then the object gets brought into the world, made out of some other stuff normally, to actually carry out the purpose. So it's interesting that I suppose the key point of all of this is whether that also goes for the whole universe. Is there a purpose ultimately for everything? Whoa, it's really deep. Anyway, next word, complexity, or two words actually, and order. And there are various complex features to the design. Usually things can't just assemble themselves together by accident. So they have to be put together by something or somebody. Usually, the more complex something is, the more design needs to go into it. So, a really basic design like a knife could take many different forms. It's, Stone Age people found sharp flints lying around, and that's what they used for their knives. But now we've created more sophisticated knives. But essentially, it's the same design, but it's quite a basic design, really. You just get the sharpest thing you can and cut your apple up with it. But some things are more complicated, like this laptop is a pretty complex piece of machinery. It's just shouted at me for touching it. You see, it's almost like it's got a mind of its own. But it was made by some people at Toshiba. So they sort of put this bit of kit together so that it would work. And usually you don't realise how complex things are until they go wrong. And then when they go wrong, you think, oh no, what's gone wrong with it? And then you have to look into what all the different parts are. But usually I don't know how anything works. I don't know how CD players work. And you probably don't even know what CD players are. So I definitely don't know how MP3 and, I don't know how anything works, really. I might try and learn that someday. Anyway, these words are important because they are mentioned a lot by people who believe that the design argument demonstrates the existence of God, because if there's a purpose to the universe and there's complexity in the universe, then there might be design in the universe. And that's what this lesson is all about. So the first philosopher that we're going to look at is called William Paley, and he was around in the 17 and 1800s, and he wrote a book called Natural Theology, or Evidences of the Existence and Attributes of the Deity. So it's a really old, massive book all about whether or not God exists. And he believed that God does exist. And he wrote down lots of theories about it, lots of evidence for it. And I haven't read it yet. I'm not very good at reading books. I read one once and thought it was quite good, but I prefer to just watch videos on YouTube, probably like you do as well, because you're watching this one. But anyway, so you don't have to read this. I'm just going to sit and read it for a minute, and hopefully it won't take too long. I'll just pause it while I just have a look. Oh, hello. Yeah, I was reading it, and it's a pretty tough read. But basically, to summarise it in about 1 minute, this guy William Paley, who wrote the book, told a made-up story about imagining that he was walking in some woods or a heath or in a field or something, and he found firstly a stone, and he just kicked it and said, it's just a stone, thought nothing of it. And then the person in the story came across one of these, an old style pocket watch. And at the time that William Paley wrote the book, these were probably the most complex things you could get. But if he was writing it now, he'd probably say iPhone 10 or whatever the newest one is, I don't know. But and he said that because of the complexity of such an object, you'd never imagine for 1 second that it wasn't created by somebody. And then he made a comparison with the universe and said, well, the universe is loads more complicated than a watch. So that's definitely also has to have a designer, because similar effects have similar causes. A good way to explain it is to have a look at this diagram. So firstly, he compares a watch to the universe and accepts that the universe is massively more complex than a watch. And then he says that because the universe is made by a watch, because the watch is made by a watchmaker, we know that there's definitely a designer there. Obviously, we don't know the outcome of what created the universe, because nobody was there. But this comparison is used to persuade. He's using an analogy, comparing the universe to a watch, and saying that the most probable explanation, or the best explanation, is that it was created by some sort of higher designing power. Isaac Newton came up with a similar argument, and he said that the thumbprint alone would be enough to convince him that there was a creator, because of the uniqueness of each thumbprint and the fact that there must be an almost infinite number of combinations of a thumbprint. So we know there's about 7.6 billion people alive now, and everyone's got their own unique thumbprint, or DNA as we now sort of might understand it. And to him that was just incredible that such magnitude of complexity could come from the universe. Newton's probably most famous for putting together a theory about gravity as well. And again, just forces like that. Isaac Newton said that learning about all these forces and the way that the universe runs itself was further evidence for a god, because it showed you that there were lots of natural laws that must have been put there by some sort of masterful creator. So, for example, look, I've just seen, hang on a minute. Check out this dude. He's in the middle of the park doing some awesome juggling, and he's depending on the idea that those balls will operate to predefined rules. Okay, you messed it up that time, but the fact that those balls were operating to such predictable laws that always exist made people like Isaac Newton believe that there must be some sort of overarching creator putting all these complex rules together. And if you look up how many laws of the universe there currently are, I know some of them are changing, but it's just staggering the amount of complexity and order that there seems to be in the universe. So if you click on to the next slide, you'll see that there are some objections now that follow. The first one of these was put forward by Charles Darwin, and it's the theory of evolution. And the basic point of that is that it's not a masterful creator that put together the universe as it is, and complex life like human beings didn't arise out of a sort of pre-designed and from the vision of some sort of overlord or masterful deity. It was rather the result of organisms naturally adapting over the environment over many generations. Whoa, someone caning it on a motorbike. Lethal. So that idea is that natural selection determines the way that we are. So eyes only work because they evolve very gradually over millions and millions and millions of years. If you look into the evidence for natural selection, I mean, it's extremely convincing theory, and you can see from looking at lots of different animals how different types of eyes or wings or legs have evolved over all these generations, and it's just based on natural random mutations. So a lot of people who follow evolution end up rejecting the idea of a creator god, which Darwin found a bit sad at the time, because he still believed in God and thought that he was a bit worried that people would sort of abandon the idea after he came up with this. Another idea, objection number 2, is borrowed from an ancient philosopher called Epicurus, who came up with a version of the problem of evil, which is that if the world was designed, why would there be so much evil and suffering in the world? Paley's argument says that because a watch was made by an intelligent creator and the universe is even more complex and intricate than a watch, then that must be made by a massively more intelligent and powerful creator. But the problem of evil throws a bit of a spanner in the works and says, well, actually, if the universe as we know it was made by God, it would be much better than this. If you'd expect it not to have so much suffering in it, like disease and moral evil and stuff like that. And obviously, there are theistic responses to that, which we'll look at later, but that's just one of the arguments against design. Oops. the third objection on the next slide is probably the most complicated one, really, but it's put forward by quite a few philosophers, really, but I'm going to concentrate on Bertrand Russell's idea because I think he's got a pretty nifty way of showing it. And he said that we generally see order and purpose, but really there might not be it. Russell was an agnostic, which meant that he didn't believe that the idea of God could be proved. So he didn't buy into design arguments because he thought that they didn't really prove the existence of God because they're based on faulty prepositions or faulty presumptions. Like, for example, one of the most important parts of Paley's argument is that the universe is ordered and not chaotic, and Russell said there's lots of evidence that points to the fact that it is pretty chaotic, but we just perceive it as being orderly because we have a mind that looks for patterns and we make big assumptions. So Bertrand Russell said it would be silly to think that a rabbit's tail is there to help people aim at it. So we might see if you were one of those people that likes going around killing animals. I've never really been into that, but if you like shooting rabbits, you might think, oh, they've got a white fluffy tail on them, brilliant, that'll help me shoot them. But Russell is saying that just because it's got a white fluffy tail on it doesn't mean that, just because it seems to run along with the idea that might be the purpose for the tail, to help you aim at it. But Russell would say it's stupid if you think that that's what it was there for, and that's why it is there. And other philosophers have said similar things too. Like I can't remember which philosopher it was, but he was talking about a billiard table and saying that if you got all the balls on the billiard table and just shoved them around randomly and made them carry on going, even though it was a random, you'd still see at certain points the balls moving in quite an orderly way, and you might think, oh yeah, they're pretty ordered, but really it's just random. So sometimes randomness does produce order. Like if you did heads and tails and tossed the coin, I don't know, 10,000 times, at certain points in that sequence, you'd probably see stretches of outcomes where it says heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, and you might think, hey, this is pretty orderly. But sometimes randomness does produce order. You'll also might see, if you tossed a coin long enough, 10 heads in a row, which has got massive odds of, I think that might be, I can't remember, a maths person will work it out, maybe 1,000 to 1 or something to get 10 heads in a row. But I suppose the point is that in this universe we do say that things are ordered, but not everybody agrees on that idea. Some people think it isn't really that as ordered as we think. One other example that I just thought of is that we sometimes think that the way that human beings have turned out, the fact that we can see and hear and got all these senses, and we give an order to your hand and it moves, that's pretty amazing. But philosophers like Bertrand Russell might well say that we would say that it was ordered and amazing whatever it was like. So even if it wasn't great, even if we didn't have any eyes, we'd still be thinking, oh, isn't it great that we can feel our way around and hear things? And then if you took the hearing away, we'd still be saying, isn't it great that we can sort of move around in this world? So, whatever the state of affairs, certain minds will say, hey, it's ordered. So Russell's just saying that that's just a perspective thing. Anyway, it's time for your input stage now. So now that you've heard some arguments for the design argument, William Paley and Isaac Newton are the main ones, and then some objections, it's time to do some work of your own. So if you get a random bit of paper, or preferably A3 if you've got it, or cut up at the inside of a cereal box would be good, like as big as you can really, and try and open up your Caboodle textbook. If you don't know how to get into Caboodle, I'll show you actually while I'm at the computer. Hang on. So you go to the top address bar thingy, and type in www.caboodle.com, and you will get to this bit. Whoops, that's my actual email address, but you don't need that one. So basically, your email, your username is the first bit of your email before you get to the at Sir John Lehman stuff. So you just type in, usually it's your first name dot your surname and then a number, and then your password is the same. Type in the same thing, and then when you get to the institution code, type in KYO4, and that should get you in. So if not, your password might have gone wrong because you've gone in it before or something. Just email me and I can reset it for you. Anyway, when you get into that online textbook, look on these pages, 106 to 107, and you'll be able to find the arguments that I've talked about, nicely summarised in paragraphs. And also you'll find some other arguments by some other philosophers. Tennant's one that I haven't talked about yet, he's in there. You will find the objections again laid out. They might be worded slightly differently, hopefully better than how I've explained them. And you can use that to make notes on for and against. So you could divide your page into two and have arguments for on one side, arguments against on the other. Or you could set it out like I've done here with a pyramid, in order of how agreeable or how coherent you think these arguments are. So if you think Paley's got the best explanation because of his watch theory, you might put him at the top. But if you think his idea is rubbish, you might put him down the bottom, and you might put Bertrand Russell at the top. So however you go about setting out your work is fine. I'm not too fussed about that. Make your own decisions and how you set it out, but just create some way of showing that you A, understand the arguments, and B, understand and can evaluate which ones you think are the best ones. Just got a quick juggling update for you. That guy, he's doing Skittles now. Chucking him. More complicated to predict than the balls, but look, you still got to get it right, and you've got to catch them right on the edge to get them right. It's not as good at doing them, is he? But you know, it's better than what I could do, so can't really criticise him too much. Okay, welcome back. Well done. I hope you've done some good work on that. Just to let you know, if you're struggling, there are two documents in the folder that you've clicked on the link to get here. One of them is called something like Hume info, and the other one's called Paley info. And if you click on those and open them up, they'll help you add more detail into your work. It's just some information about two of the main people. Paley's obviously for the design argument, because I explained about him earlier. He's the one that talked about the watch, and Hume is one of the people against it. So if you need some more detail and info, then just read those documents and maybe put some more notes into your work. So we're going to move on to the next part of the lesson now, which is focusing in on one of the arguments against the design argument, and it's called the problem of evil. So I mentioned it earlier actually in Epicurus, saying that the world doesn't look like it's been made by God because there's so much evil in it and so much bad design. So anyway, the objectives for this part of the lesson are: number one, identify natural suffering and moral evil, because there's a difference between the two. Two, explain the problem of evil. And then finally, evaluate some ideas about where we think evil might come from. So firstly, there's a song in the folder as well, and it's by the Black Eyed Peas, and it's called Where Is the Love? So whatever stereo or headphones or sound system you've got, turn it on and turn it up to maximum volume, and say that it's your RE homework, so you have to do it. And basically, I want you to just listen to that song and try and listen to all of the bad things in the world that will.i.am and his pals are singing about, and make a little list somewhere of all the negative, bad, evil stuff that's going on in that song. Okay, so pause it now and have a listen, and make a list of the bad things that you can find. And once you've done that, you'll be aware that some of the things that are spoken about or most of the things, I haven't listened to that song for ages, by the way, but as far as I can remember, most of the stuff that's in that song is things that humans do, like chemical gases filling lungs of little ones. It's like we put the chemicals there and we've messed about with them. And they also talk about, what's one of the other bits? The Bloods and the Crips and the KKK. So these are gangs and bad, evil sort of organisations. And these are human beings that have put these together and got together with some other people and said, hey, let's go around wearing white sheets and be really racist. So these are stuff that humans have done. But there's also bad things that go on in the world that are moral. And that's the next task. You need to try and sort the examples of evil into moral and natural evils. So have a look at these examples here and see if you can put them into a table of which things are moral evil and which things are natural evil in the world. Okay, pause it if you aren't ready yet for the answers. Okay, next slide. So you can see there, moral evil is stuff like murder, theft, and racism. But natural evils are things like earthquakes and volcanoes and tsunamis. Notice in the middle that things like famine could be both, and poverty as well. There could occur naturally, like a famine might happen if there's a drought in a country and the crops can't grow. But the famine really only continues because other people might not help out, or maybe there's some corruption going on in the country, which means that the poorest people are the ones that suffer and die while others don't. So that's what sort of creates the injustice in that situation. But and consider as well, a key question at the bottom, can God be responsible for moral evils? Because some religious people say that it's humans that have free will and we must bear responsibility for moral stuff that goes wrong. And when we look at defences to the problem of evil in year 10, that might be something that we think about a lot. So now, using the same online textbook, click onto pages 112 to 113, and there you'll see 2 pages all devoted to the idea of the problem of evil. So read through those, pick out the key points, and just make sure that you can discuss with someone in your house why people might disagree with the idea that God created the world based on the problem of evil. Now, obviously, if you live in a very religious household, you'll probably speak to somebody who's got some answers to that problem of evil. And they might well say, hey, I can explain that because God gave us free will, or maybe the purpose of life isn't to be happy. So they might have some arguments against. Or you might find people in your house that totally agree and go, yeah, the problem of evil, that proves that God isn't real. Whichever way it is, just try and make up your own mind, and your ideas will probably change as you go through life anyway. But it's good to think about these things. So maybe jot down some extra things onto your argument sheet. Finally, when you've done all that, click on and have a look at the next slide. This is a comparison between 2 viewpoints of the natural world. The traditional hymn, All Things Bright and Beautiful, and then a parody of that. I think Monty Python did that sort of joke one, All Things Dull and Ugly. And it's a bit of a, whichever one you agree with the most might sort of signify whereabouts you stand on this debate about whether the world is designed by a loving creator or not. And finally, use this info and all the things that you've learnt about today to plot yourself on this graph to see, if I was going to use this to actually see if the group that I was teaching had a correlation, like whether they all were in one area or another. But maybe you could do this in your house. You could say, for example, someone might say, the world is a very good place and it's been designed by a loving creator. But you might think the world is a really awesome place, but it hasn't been designed. It's just randomly sort of come about that, the universe is good and ordered and I'm happy living in it. And And some people might be the opposite. They might think, actually, the universe is not a good design. It's just chaos. It's random nonsense, and it's not been designed. You might not find so many people that say it's not good and has still been designed. Because if they believe it's designed, usually they believe in God, so they're not going to admit that it's not very good. But obviously that's the whole problem of evil, which is if you believe in God and that God designed the world, it's hard then to understand the bits of it that aren't good. It doesn't quite sort of make sense, but it's very interesting to talk about anyway, and we'll talk about this more as we go through the years, especially in year 10. I think we look at that even more. Anyway, if you've got to the final slide, that one is just about getting you to bring together everything that you've found out. So you've found out some arguments for the existence of God based on design, William Paley and Isaac Newton. You've also considered some of the objections to that idea, and you just have to weigh it all up in your mind and come to a conclusion. And it's possibly one of the really most difficult topics to think about, really, because the human brain is really conditioned to see patterns in things. It's even if you believe in evolution, for example, you might know that human beings have it hardwired into our brains to notice predators. So if you're walking along, you might see a stick and think it looks like a snake. You're always going to be wary of things. Sometimes I see a bit of fluff on the carpet and think it's a spider. And I'm not even scared of spiders, but just knowing that could be a creature just makes an impulse in your brain just go, something there. So what's that got to do with the design argument? Oh yeah, so it might suggest that there's the patterns by which we see the world are built into us by evolution. But even if evolution's true, that doesn't mean that there isn't still an overall God watching over everything and using evolution to create the way that things are supposed to be. So there'll never be a winner to this argument, by the way. So if you live in a house where certain people are really religious and other people are really not religious, you could keep this argument going for days. So good luck with that. And I hope you've found the work interesting today, and email if there's any problems. And I'm going to get going in a minute because my phone that I'm filming this on is running really low on charge, and I think it might run out really soon. So hopefully you found this interesting. Next lesson, I can't think what next lesson is about. I think it might be about miracles, but I'm not sure. I'll have to check the scheme of work. Oh my word, that guy's juggling chainsaws. You're not going to believe this. Quick, I hope my phone doesn't run out of